If I'd known all of you were going to come, I would have prepared something for today. But instead, first of all, for those of you who are new to Learning and Lunch, the rule is you can get up anytime and go get food to eat. It's not like you're not stuck there like you are in a real classroom or in synagogue. Please feel free. Nobody will get offended. I certainly won't get offended. This is lunchtime, so have lunch. All right. So I had spent some time thinking about, like, what should my last Learning and Lunch be about? And I remembered what Simon Greenberg of blessed memory, who was kind of the echt conservative rabbi. He was a rabbi's rabbi. He was my father's mentor and many others, one of the founders of the University of Judaism. And I had him in his last year of senior homiletics. That is, when you're a senior, they give you a speaking class, homiletics, but it's really not so much how to speak as it is what kind of content and stuff, what themes you should address, some stuff that whoever the teacher is used, that you can use, that kind of thing. And he told us at the beginning of the class, all your best sermons are delivered to yourself. And I have found that to be the case, right? When there's something that preoccupies me, it makes a better sermon than when I just think, oh, I should talk about this. So I decided for Learning and Lunch, and actually, it's not just that, it's also the fact that where I am in life at the moment gave me a different sort of angle on the Torah. And that's what I'm going to talk about, because I realized how much of the Torah is about transitions. Now, I just want to say before I begin that, well, I've already begun, before I begin with the actual meat or substance of the subject, that when I sent out the email to the congregation that I was going to be leaving at the end of this year, the end of this whatever academic year, I had originally entitled the email Transition. And my daughter said, Dad, you cannot title your email Transition that you write to the congregation because it doesn't have the meaning that you think it has in our day. You have to pick another title. And I went, oh, yeah. And so I called it Life News. But I want to make clear that I'm using just like the word gay has an entirely different meaning from what it used to mean, so does transition now has different implications, but I'm using it in the old sense of going from one thing to another, not specifically, obviously, gender related. Just wanted to make that clear before I started, because I remember when she said that to me, we both cracked up, and I thought, yeah, you are right, and I'm so glad I didn't send it before you said that. What is striking to me, though, about the Torah, and before I get to the rest of it, I want to make this large point, is almost all of the Torah, 4/5 of it, that is, except for the book of Genesis, almost all the Torah happens in what sociologists call liminal space. Liminal space is those spaces between where you're coming from and where you're going to, right? So sometimes they're represented by doorways, are liminal spaces. And if you think about the Torah, so there is creation, there's the beginning, and then there's a sort of uncertain fate to the world until you get a new beginning, which is with Abraham. And all of that is a kind of prelude, which is why it only takes 12 chapters out of the entire Torah, and in fact out of the entire Tanakh, which, as you know, is the whole Bible, which is much larger than the Torah being here 5 books, and the Tanakh being all of the biblical writings. And then you come to Abraham. And Abraham, too, starts off in his journey, which is, again, between where he comes from and where he goes to. And then, as soon as he arrives in Israel and starts being a family, you have this different kind of liminal space between being a family and being a people. And all of Genesis is about the transition from family to peoplehood. Peoplehood doesn't happen until the beginning of Exodus, right? At the very end of Genesis, you remember the last scene of Genesis is Jacob blessing his children. It's a family scene. And Jacob gives various blessings to the children, and then he's gathered to his people, and Joseph dies and is gathered to his people, and then you come to Exodus, and all of a sudden there's a people there. Before that, there was just a family there. And even though the people has gone through slavery for hundreds of years, remember, before Moses comes along, we sometimes forget that. That is, the Israelites have been in slavery for hundreds of years. The Torah doesn't tell us anything about that, because it's interested in the liminal moments, in the changing moments, and not in stasis, not in things that stay the same. The thing that stayed the same is they were slaves for hundreds of years. The Torah has nothing to tell us about that. What changed was God was now going to liberate them and bring them into this liminal space, and the Torah has a lot to say about that. And the liminal space, again, is the desert. The desert is the place that they're not staying. The desert represents the place that where they came from and where they are going to, right? And so let me say a word about liminal spaces. If you look up liminal space, which I did, it will tell you exactly what you would expect, which is they're places of anxiety, right? I mean, what are the great stressors of life? One of them is moving. Why is that? Because to be in a liminal space, I mean, apart from all the, oh my God, I forgot to disconnect the whatever, but even apart from that, the transition from one thing to another thing is inherently anxiety producing, because you don't feel like, okay, I am here. And so life transitions. One of the things I was told, well, I actually read, but I now repeat it to all the rabbis when they get trained, is when I graduated rabbinical school, they gave us a book called From Generation to Generation. It was written by a guy who was a rabbi and also a family systems therapist. Really smart book, very interesting, and I don't remember that much about it, but one of the things that he said, I'll tell you actually 3 things I remember about the book. One thing he said was, every congregation is a family and has the same dynamics as a family, identical. You just have to be able to spot the patterns. He said, and one of the patterns is around every life event, there's tremendous anxiety, whether it's happy or sad. There's anxiety around a bar mitzvah, there's anxiety around a wedding, there's anxiety around a funeral. Every life event produces anxiety. And I am here to tell you, after 26 years, boy, is that true. I've seen family members who get along well and love each other and so on. The only time they ever fought is at the wedding, right? Because you sat Uncle so-and-so with cousin this and that, and don't you know that they hate each other because he cheated him in a business deal. And so he said, it is the rabbi's job, or the pastor's job or whatever, to be a non-anxious presence. You're the one who's supposed to say at the wedding, it's going to be fine. Don't worry. I know they didn't deliver the flowers. At the end of the night, you'll still be married. Really, I mean, it's true though, because as you know, when you're anxious, you can focus on things that aren't really the issue, right? And so you're upset about the flowers when what you're really upset about the fact is that you're about to change your life completely and you don't really know what it's going to be like on the other side of the transition, because that's the whole point about a transition, is you don't know what the other side is going to be like. When you think about it, as the Israelites were going through the desert, they had no idea what Israel would really be like. They'd lived in Egypt for hundreds of years. They didn't know what Israel would be. And it didn't matter how often Moses told them it was a land of milk and honey, right? What was the first eyewitness account they got was from the spies. And the spies said, it's terrible, and everybody there is a giant, and they're going to kill us. And so now we think of Caleb and Yehoshua as heroes, because they said, no, it's fine, God will take care of it. But who would you believe? Right? We would believe the other guys. You're not going to believe the two guys who say, oh, it's going to be fine. This is, since I introduced her at the beginning of the talk, I'll mention her again. I remember my daughter saying to me once, you know, sometimes it's really annoying, Dad, that you always think everything's going to be okay. But I'm glad that you always think everything's going to be okay, right? But you know that the person who always says it's going to be okay, you stop believing, right? Because they always think it's going to be okay, and therefore they inevitably overlook all the dangers along the way. And that's just, so when Caleb and Yehoshua came back and everybody else said, the place is terrible, why would you believe them? And I think that it's not coincidental that from Abraham to Moses, and even once they enter the land, that the Torah is full of the idea of liminal space. Because, first of all, it is Nachmanides, Ramban, said, Ma'aseh avot siman labanim. What happens to the ancestors is a sign to the descendants. In other words, you're going to experience what they went through. And the Jewish people has lived almost its entire life, not all, but almost its entire life in liminal spaces. We were guests to a great extent in other people's countries. That's what makes it different, by the way, about being in America. I just want to make a pitch for America, is there's no host. The French were the hosts, the Russians were the hosts, the Germans were the hosts, on and on and on and on, but there are no Americans that hosting Jews. But until America or modern Israel, every other country we were in felt like a liminal space, which is why again and again and again we were kicked out of the country and then brought back depending on what people needed or didn't need. Right? And not only was it a liminal space because of the hosts, but sometimes, as in Spain, the hosts changed. Can you imagine if you're a Jew in Spain and you hear that the Christians are taking the country from the Muslims? You don't know what that's going to be like. You may be in the same place geographically, you might live in the same house, but your rulers are about to entirely change, and so is the culture about to entirely change, and you have to respond to that. So you're still in a liminal space, even though you're in the same geographical space that you were before. But here's the second side of it, is that the liminal space is what makes you, in addition to being anxious, it also is a tremendous driver of creativity. Because you all know when you are in the same space at the same time for too long, you come up with the same thoughts. And one of the reasons why it is unhealthy for any kind of institution or government or whatever, which is what our founding fathers discovered, for one person to be in charge forever and ever, is because inevitably they will not be as creative in year 30 as they were in year 3. They can't be. Because the liminal space changes the way you look at the world, and therefore, as it says in Hebrew, mishaneh makom, mishaneh mazal. You change your place, you change your luck. Because you're not going to be, you might be the same person wherever you go, but the surrounding circumstances force you to think differently. It is one of the reasons why, what is the great engine of creativity in American life? Immigration. And all of us are evidence of that, right? Whatever policy you have, I'm not talking about like you should have more immigrants, you should have less immigrants. Believe me, the last thing I want to do is get involved in a policy dispute in my waning days. But America in general, I mean, everybody practically, the vast majority of Americans, 90-some%, are immigrants to this country in the last few hundred years. And if you look around at the people who run companies or create things or so on, sometimes they themselves, sometimes you only have to trace 1 or 2 generations back to discover that they came here as immigrants. And you know that part of their creativity is a response to a new environment where talents are unleashed that wouldn't be unleashed had they stayed back at home. And in fact, the willingness, I think, to enter liminal spaces is in and of itself a measure of creativity. Because one of the things that immigration does is it selects for the most fearless, the most ambitious, the most on and on and on and on, because otherwise you would just stay at home, right? You didn't know which, I mean, when I think about, like, my great-grandparents came to this country. All my grandparents, by the way, 2 of them were born here and 2 of them were brought here as babies. They all had Boston accents. None of them. I didn't have a grandparent with a Yiddish accent. I had a great-grandmother with a Yiddish accent, but I think she had a Yiddish accent. I don't know, because she only spoke Yiddish. So it's really hard to tell what kind of accent she had in English. But when I think about what she and her contemporaries went through and knew they were going through, and I don't know if you know this, but it is a big myth that we like to believe, that I hate to explode on tape. It's a big myth that our ancestors came here mainly because of persecution. Eastern European Jews, the overwhelming majority, came here because of economic opportunity, not because of I mean, some were persecuted, and many came because of persecution, and the pogroms certainly accelerated the immigration, but most came here because America was the golden Medina, was the golden state, where you could make a living, much better than you could there. But you know that in order to take a journey on a ship for weeks in steerage, which is not pleasant, so that you can get to this place where you maybe had a relative or maybe didn't, and didn't know how you would find them and didn't know what it was going to be like, and everybody spoke a different language, you can imagine that you have to be ambitious to do that. And if you're not ambitious, you stay home. And you think, you know, the crazy people, the Meshuganas who are going over to America, when we've lived here for a long time, we'll continue to live here. But the Torah gives that impetus because it gives you model after model after model of people who leave home. In fact, that's how it starts. God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladcha u'mibeit avicha el ha'aretz asher ar'eka, which, by the way, is the first verse that they taught us in yeshiva when I was a kid. And we all had to go around and memorize it, and it's stuck forever, which is, go out of your house, from your father's house, from the land that you were born, to the place that I will show you. Right? And that's, in other words, enter the liminal space, and you don't know what's going to happen at the other end, which is certainly true to all of us, and you will see what happens at the other end will be better, in some sense, than where you are now. And in this context, even different can be better. But that the Torah is like that, and that the Torah prescribes that, and that, in fact, in an even more radical sense, the Torah is about that, because the Torah is 2 brackets between a mythological place that was and a mythological place that will be, right? You've got on one end the Garden of Eden. And as soon as you're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, you're in liminal space, because the Garden of Eden is stasis. Everything will be the same in the Garden of Eden forever. Nothing will change, right? The trees will bloom the same way every single day, and all the animals will love each other, and everything will be perfect. And we didn't last there one day. Not one day, right? It's a single day. God, according to the rabbis, the same day Adam is created, he eats the fruit. And so does Eve. And then at the end is the Messiah. And the Messiah is also this mythological stasis. The lion's going to lay down with the lamb, and everything's going to be perfect, and everything's going to be fine. But of course, I don't mean to, like, we never get there. We never get there. Do you know how many generations of Jews have assumed that they were the generation that was going to have the Messiah? In fact, even in the span of our own lifetime, my teacher, Eliezer Shlomovic, told me in his village of Slotvina, in the middle of the night, if people heard a loud sound, they would rush out onto the streets thinking the Messiah had come. It was that immediate to them, that vivid, right? So if that was true in the 20th century, you can imagine in the 13th century, in the 11th century, how many people thought the Messiah was going to come. And we know how many false messiahs there have been in history. And in Jewish history, you probably don't know about all of them, but there have been a lot of false messiahs in Jewish history, because people had this tremendous desire to not be in the liminal space anymore, which essentially is life, but in the Torah, it's heightened. Right, it's heightened because it says there is this perfect place that we were from, and there is this perfect place that we are going to. And we do have very deep resistance to change in general, but especially change that we don't control. Change that we choose, we have less of a resistance to. But change that we don't control, which is what the Torah, I mean, the Israelites didn't control it, right? And they didn't, and Adam and Eve they didn't really control it. Change that we don't control, that puts us in this amorphous, you were this and you're going to be that space, is very scary. And so you can see why I've been thinking about these themes. And I think that in that sense, in the deepest possible way, without explicitly saying it, the Torah psychologically prepares us for what life inevitably brings. Because transitions are a part of life, and some of them are so slow that you don't notice the transition except by looking backwards. And then you see the transition, like when people tell me, oh, you haven't changed at all, and then I see old pictures of myself. And I think, oh, yes, I have, quite a bit, in fact. But that, I mean, just growing older is a transition, but all of life is that. Heraclitus got it right thousands of years ago. You cannot step in the same river twice, right? And his point was, all of life is change. All of life is change. And I think the Torah makes the same point, just in a different way. Once you're out of Eden, everything will change. And that doesn't make it comfortable or easy, but I think that the Torah assures us that it is inevitable, and it was dealt with by our ancestors day in and day out, over and over again, and that we will have the same issues and the same questions. The second thing that I thought I would do during the Lunch and Learn is usually I ask people to ask questions about whatever the topic is. But I'm going to open it up to any question you want to ask, seriously, any question, and I will do my best at least to respond. I won't say to answer, but to respond. So please feel free to ask anything you want. Thank you. It's been great. That's it. Go ahead.
I can only imagine that as a rabbi, people come to you with the worst tragedies or experience. I can only imagine, me, thank God, I can only imagine an adult who's a child, something that's people come to you with these, we call them absolute tragedy of life. Have you ever thought to yourself privately, I have nothing, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to tell them? Not
only privately, I've said it to them. One of the things that you learn early on, and you're also, it's so well known among people who deal with this that it's almost a commonplace, is that when someone comes to you with a tragedy, they're actually not looking for a theological answer. They're not coming to say, oh, now so Aquinas said this, or Maimonides said that, now I get it. It's a cry of pain, and there's nothing to do in answer to that except to be there. So it's different. It's different in a class and in an office or whatever. So I know that it's it's a very deep human tendency, and we all do this, to elevate people when we need them to be something. We do it to our doctors all the time, right? But you have to tell. That's why everybody says to their doctor, if this were your mother, what would you do? Right? Everybody who's ever gone to a doctor says that to their doctor. Because we think that they have some greater wisdom, and therefore, and most doctors who understand this will say, well, if it were my mother, I would make this choice, because they know what choice they think you should make. But the same thing with rabbis. It's not as though by going through this that you're necessarily vested with any special wisdom that the person doesn't know, except the wisdom of not being that person, which is really helpful sometimes, right? Because it's so much easier to see someone else's dilemma than your own. So sometimes you can point out things to someone that they honestly wouldn't have thought for themselves. But except for those rabbis that are trained as therapists, you're not trained. I mean, we have a couple classes in counseling, but you're not trained as a therapist. So, but the one other thing that I would say is that the advantage of being an older rabbi as opposed to a younger rabbi is every situation is unique, but they're all the same. That is, there's only a certain range of things that human beings can do and give them pain. And when someone starts a story in your office saying, I'm sure you've never heard anything like this before, the first thing that runs through your mind is, yeah, I have. Whatever you're going to say, I have. But it always has unique twists, right? Because each person is different. But there are patterns to human pain, and there are, that's one of the reasons, by the way, why we read the Torah. Because the same sibling rivalries that are in the Torah are true today too. If they didn't follow patterns, there'd be no purpose.
When people say, does Judaism have a statement such as it's God's will?
Does it have a statement? Yes. And you will go to some rabbis who will say that. Judaism says everything. It says everything. You can find, Louis Ginsburg, who was a great scholar of Talmud and Midrash. Once, my father said, he once said to the class, you know the English phrase, the devil can quote scripture to his purpose, basically meaning that the Bible says everything, so the devil, in other words, you can quote bad things from it too. So he said to them, the devil can quote scripture to his purpose, and if he were more learned, he could quote the Talmud too. So, of course, Judaism says everything. And there are people who believe, and there's a large school of theology, that everything is God's will. Everything is God's will. Yeah. What will the lunch and learn. That's what I will miss most. What will I miss most? If you want me to be honest, the honest truth is I don't know yet. I don't know, because sometimes you surprise yourself. You think, oh, I thought I was going to miss this, but actually I missed that. So I'll let you know. I mean, if you ask me in a year, I'll be able to answer that question. It's hard. One of the nice things about being a rabbi is there's so many different aspects of this job that it's hard to say, and they interpenetrate. You can't say, like, when you say I'll miss the people, what does that mean? I mean, it means certain people in certain situations and things that I'll do far fewer weddings, funerals, counseling, whatever, but it's not like I would never do that again. So I don't know exactly what I'll miss. Will I miss the one thing that I know I will not miss is the constant uncertainty about whether any plan I make will actually be able to be realized. Because you can get a call at any moment, and whatever you plan to do is overridden by the fact that somebody that you have to take care of has to be taken care of. So that's a big difference because somebody said to me, for example, well, I'll give you an example. Like I was talking, not somebody, you know who the somebody is, Howard. At the gala, I was talking to Howard and Michal, and Howard said, we're going to be in Israel for Sukkot. And I thought to myself, oh my God, if I wanted to, I could be in Israel for Sukkot. And I can't tell you, it was like a revelation. I have not, for so many years, I have not been able to say something like that. And I think that will be very I don't know how quickly I'll get used to it, because you get used to everything and then it's not fantastic anymore. But I have to say, the moment when I realized, oh, I could be in Israel for Sukkot, that was a great moment. I'll be here, by the way, for Yom Kippur. I'm giving the Kol Nidre sermon. That's part of the deal. And I have to say, like, my very wonderful successors, Rabbis Guzik and Sherman, they want me to like show up every now and then, but I told them not too much. So, what am I excited about? So even though I grant that I read all the time, I have a pile of books that I will have much more time to read. It's not even that I'll have more time. It's that I will be able to read them knowing that I can read this for as long as I want to. And also, I don't know how successful I'll be about this, but I am completely unable right now to put my phone down and read a book and not check my email. And I think I will be able to do that because I won't have the same, but we'll see. That's going to take some time. I'm excited about I'm excited about what it'll be like to be at a university and to teach. Yeah.
It's a little bit to ask this, but I'm going back to God. Do you believe in the will of God?
Do I believe in the will of God? I have three separate answers to that, okay? Seriously. The first is that nobody could possibly understand what the will of God is. People talk about it as though they know, but the truth is, and the analogy I always use is, does a 2-year-old understand the will of an adult? No, couldn't possibly. Doesn't even know what it is they don't understand. And God is far greater in proportion to us than we are to 2-year-olds. So when we talk about the will of God, the truth is all those people who tell you that they know what the will of God is, they have no idea what they're talking about. That's first of all. Having said that, yes, I believe God has some kind of will, but I don't know what it is, right? And third, what I would say is things in this world are, to the extent that human beings control them, I think are human controlled. I don't think it was, for example, do I believe that it was the will of God that millions of Jews were killed in the Holocaust? No, I don't. I don't think God wanted that. So do things happen in this world that God, to the extent that I understand God at all, that God objects to? Yes. I don't believe that everything happens according to God's will. Because in order to believe that, I think you have to believe some obscenities, like God wanted the Holocaust to happen, God wanted the Cambodian genocide to happen, God wanted all those people to get shot in Chicago yesterday or whatever. So that's what I would say. Yeah. Oh. How do I see the future of Judaism in America? I think that we don't know, in the same way that part of it is what happens in America. Because most of the time when you say, well, if you would have asked, for example, in the 30s, what do you think of German Jewry? Everybody would have been wrong because they didn't know what was going to happen in Germany. There could be all sorts of, crises in America or events in America that could change the religious landscape. We happen to be living right now through a time when literalist religion, that is fundamentalism in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, all those religions is flourishing. But the fact that it's flourishing today doesn't mean that it's going to flourish in 50 years. So I don't know what will happen to all those kids who were raised in one kind of culture, but all of a sudden the culture doesn't support that anymore. The reason that Ben-Gurion gave personal status sovereignty to the Orthodox was because he thought there'll be no Orthodox in 50 years. because he thought, obviously, it's all going away. And the opposite proved to be true. So prophecy's a really tough game. The most I can do is to try to educate Jews as best I can and let the future take care of itself. Yeah.
Rabbi Wolpe, thanks for being here.
Sure.
And I'm going to miss you. Last sermon, you were talking about Torah,
Yeah.
and you said it's a book of life. So the thing I'm going to miss the most is your sermons. But I'm glad it's you too.
Thank you. Thank you. There are years and years of them online, by the way. You can listen anytime you want.
But I have become addicted to it. You said Torah is book of life, and everybody should read it. There are 5 big books, and I don't know how much time I have.
Yeah.
Where do I start?
Okay, so it depends what you want, but I would say at least Genesis, which is all the stories, the beginning of Exodus, of Shemot, and then my favorite books in the Tanakh. Forget the 5 books, but the entire Tanakh. I love the book, and it's very short. It takes you maybe 30 minutes to read, but it will last you a lifetime, of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. I'm prejudiced towards it because it was also my father's favorite book, but it's if you've never read it, it's a remarkable book. It really is a remarkable book, and it's, as I said, really 30 minutes, maybe an hour at most to read. Depends on how quickly or slowly you read it and how much you pause after each of its sayings, but there's so much in that. But God, it's hard to, I mean, the book of Job, especially the very beginnings and the end are and all the poetry in the middle, but that takes longer to read, is magnificent. I would say that's at least, it's at least a good start. And the best stories, and the most interesting stories in the Torah, probably, for my money, but I mean, I'm prejudiced because I wrote a book about it, is the book of Samuel 1 and 2, which has the stories of Saul and David. And they're incredible stories. And David is the most human character in the Bible because there's more about him than about any other figure, and so much of it is exactly like us. So, yeah. Christian Orthodoxy bans yoga. I did not know that. Okay. What does Judaism think about yoga as a physical discipline or as a spiritual practice or as a, I mean, there are Jewish yoga classes all over Los Angeles, right? We've had yoga classes here in the synagogue. So, right. I mean, I'm sure you could find rabbis who don't like yoga, but I think they're inflexible. Oh, yes, I know. I know, that was terrible. That was terrible. Yeah, yes. Sure. Okay.
What do you think about the Haredim? I have plenty of points. What do you think about the Haredim influencing Jerusalem?
What do I think about the ultra-Orthodox influencing the government in Israel? I think that, well, there's a procedural question and a substantive question. Procedurally, Israel's a democracy. And if you have a group and you have influence, then you influence. That's the way it works there. That's the way it works here. It's like asking, how do I feel about evangelical Christians having an influence here? My answer is, if they succeed in the political process, then they deserve all the influence that they get. And I would say that about the Haredim. Some of the policies, the problem, of course, is that we don't share their theological assumption. Their theological assumption is there's nothing more valuable than sitting all day and studying Torah. And we think, yeah, getting a job is good, right? But but recognize that, like, in the context of Jewish tradition, they have a long history of supporting that position. I think that economically, it's very unproductive for the state, and it's going to have to come to some kind of mutually agreed upon solution, because otherwise the state won't survive. That's what I think. Yeah. I'm going to teach one course at Harvard, just one. It starts in January. It's going to be called Sources of Jewish Spirituality. And no, it's not online. I asked. They said no, because we want people to pay tuition when they go to Harvard, and not, yeah. So, yeah. So I have given actually classes about it before, and you can look up also, you can send them. Last year's Yom Kippur sermon was, is there an afterlife? But the very short answer is not heaven and hell, but the rabbis clearly thought that there was a possibility of punishment and reward after this world. We have no dogmatic beliefs about what kind of reward you get. So the rabbis talk about Gan Eden, which means the Garden of Eden, or Olam Haba, which means the world to come, but they don't speak of it specifically as, heaven or hell, and you can find more details in that sermon. But that's what I would say. Yes, Jews do believe that people live on after their death. It does not prescribe exactly what that would be, and different Jewish theologians have had different ideas, and we'll find out. Yeah. Do you know what about? Oh, do I need to put a mezuzah on my balcony, and what about a walk-in closet? Unless you intend to dwell in that closet, you can let it go. And also with the balcony, the same thing. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 I don't know about Berklee School of Music. I was just invited actually to speak at a different university. And I'm sure I'll be speaking to a bunch, also because I'm doing some work with the ADL, so I'm going to write. Okay. So what are you doing next year? Funny you should ask. So I'm doing a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to be writing a weekly Torah commentary for the ADL that they're going to send out to their ginormous list. And I'll certainly make sure that it gets sent out to Off the Pulpit as well, or whatever list I've been sending stuff to beforehand. So I'm going to work with them. And then I'm doing some work with the Maimonides Foundation, which funds all sorts of programs here and in Israel. And also I'm going to be teaching a class once a month for a synagogue in New York. And I think that's it. And of course, I'll be here from time to time. And I'll be at Harvard. What's that? Since I don't think they announced it yet, I can't tell you, but as soon as they announce it, I will tell you. It's a citywide program that I'm doing with someone else. So it should be a lot of fun. I hope so. Yeah. Right. Jewish. Right. I'll let you know when I get there what it's like. The one thing that I will say is there are two causes for the reduction of Jews in the Ivy Leagues. One is that the Ivy Leagues concentrate, as you know, very, very much on racial and ethnic diversity. The second is that when you go to college now, you compete against students from all over the world. That didn't used to be true. So there's a lot more competition. It's a lot harder to get in. I mean, I went to Penn. It's a lot harder to get into Penn than when I went to Penn. And part of the reason it's a lot harder is because you have students from India and students from China, and that didn't exist when I went to Penn. So there's a lot, but I'll see what the Jewish life at Harvard, I've heard different things from different people. So I'll let you know what I find. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask.
Yes, I'm going to be there at the Divinity School. Yeah.
With all of your professional these opportunities, how most would you like to use
I want to write and teach and speak. I mean, so that's what I want to do. I mean, one of the things that the synagogue has given me, it's given me platforms to do all of that. So, but I'd like to divest myself of the board meetings. Tonight is my last board meeting, actually. Yes, exactly. That's right. So, right. Yeah. I think there are several. But actually, all the ones that you've identified, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm older than you. I remember the watch. Saying that all we have to do is that we give ourselves right, really not right. And I wonder whether or not that is a problem that we don't. I think the difference between a conservative Orthodox Jews as Jews, you can recognize some of these is part of the reason why there's anti-Semitism going up on the campus because a lot of Jews identify white instead of being on the Jew and crossing on the Jew, and the fact is not recognized really as a minority because of religion.
Well, of course I understand. Yeah, I understand the point. It's a point that's been much discussed. The point was that Jews regard themselves as white and therefore are not seen as a minority. I would switch that just a little bit. Jews are seen by the rest of the world as white. It has nothing to do with how we see ourselves. It has to do with the fact that for most people who come to this synagogue, you could go to Wichita and divest yourself of your Jewish identity and live a life there relatively unmolested as a Jew. A black person in America cannot go to Wichita, divest themselves of their blackness, and live like unmolested as a black person. It doesn't happen. Molested here just doesn't mean, I mean, it has a connotation in the old-fashioned meaning of like bothered or treated badly. So while it is true that Jews are not white in the sense that, first of all, everybody knows there's a rainbow color of Jews, right? There are black Jews, there are brown Jews, but in America especially, the vast majority of Jews who have been here for a long time, whom Americans have had experience of, are people who could pass as white if they wanted to. And so, yes, when people see white people as having been unfairly privileged for practically as long as the country has been around, they see Jews as part of that. It's a much more complicated issue than that. Jews say, but don't you see that my grandparents were killed in the Holocaust? And the answer I think that some people would give is, yes, I understand that, but I'm talking about you now are able to live in this world in a way that I can't. So it's complicated. I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying.
UCLA, you have 2.3
I'm aware of that. It's not, I'm not going to be at Yale. And I have no role as a Jew. I'm asked to teach in the divinity school. That's it. What I end up doing, I'll see when I see what the situation is. It's at Harvard, though, not Yale. Right. Well, I'm not, look, I'm going to go around Harvard. I'm a rabbi. I'll wear a kippah. People are going to know who I am. It's no secret. But we'll see. I'll see when I get there what it's like. I'll let you know. But the issue of anti-Semitism and racism are kindred but a little bit separate, and it's really complicated to untangle them in this country, and also, by the way, in Israel, where it's clear that the Ethiopian Jews are Jews, but they still suffered from discrimination in Israel. So it's a hard, it's like, this requires a lot of thinking and a lot of work. But I will also say most anti-Semitism has nothing to do with whether we're white, black, or brown. Most anti-Semitism is just hatred of Jews. And you could be any color, you could be purple, it would not matter. And we know this because it's not like Germans had thought Jews were white and therefore wanted to kill them. So, unfortunately. You remember Tom Lehrer's song? National Brotherhood Week? I'll give you the relevant verse. The black folks hate the brown folks hate the black folks, the Hindus hate the Muslims, and everybody hates the Jews. That was the verse, right? So, other questions or comments? Yeah. How can you what? How can you distribute birth control among the Haredim? I mean, what?
They are the biggest enemies.
I want to say this also. Tolerance is a two-way street. I hear a lot of Jews who are not Haredim speak about the Haredim in the way sometimes that non-Jews speak about Jews. So first of all, my suggestion, if you're really worried about the Haredim, is make a Haredi friend or two and talk to them and hear their point of view. They see it very differently. And it's really worth in the same way that any other group, you say, unless you know them, you don't know them, it's more complicated, I think, from the Haredi friends that I've talked to, it's more complicated than that. Having said that also, I mean, I also very much hope that Israel does not become a majority Haredi community, only because if they persist in the current economic patterns especially that they have, and also their desire to legislate halacha for those who aren't Haredim, it would not be the Israel that I recognize and want to exist. But I think we really need to be careful about how we speak about other Jews because, we have enough people who speak badly about us that we should be careful. We should be careful. So, yeah.
Any ideas about now that you'll have give reading lists every?
The problem with reading lists is I don't know what other people want to read. I mean, right, but I'm just like, so it's really hard to say. If someone says to me, can you give me a recommendation for a book that is like this, this, or this, that I can answer. But I read a lot of different stuff, so so I don't know, yeah.
You were not a rabbi. Someone said, what is the secular form of wisdom you have greatest, would recommend the most? What would your answer be?
It's a great question. I mean, for me, it's hard for me to say what I have most esteem for. If it's wisdom, though, I would go to literature, because I was an English literature major and so on. But as an individual, there's certainly more wisdom in Shakespeare than any other single writer. But I think that it's not. But it's, I mean, to read as widely as possible is to get as many different perspectives as possible. And so if you read Shakespeare, you'll never know, for example, what it's like to grow up in Argentina. But if you read Borges, you will, or what it's like to grow up in Nigeria, or what it's like to grow up in Russia, or so on. So, it depends how much of the human experience you want to try to experience while you only get to be here once. But that's the point of it. Also, I love a good mystery novel. Yes, it's true. Okay, so I know that I'm not recommending this. I really am not, but I am a compartmentalizer and a denier. When I said that my daughter says I always think everything's going to be okay, clearly there's some part of reality that I'm denying to say it's going to be okay, right? If I was somebody who was actually as sensitive as to feel all the different tendrils of reality, I would know. But I deal with it by just assuming that somehow it's going to work out, and also by asking a lot of people for help. And one of the tremendous advantages, unspeakably great advantages of being a rabbi, okay, is I heard on a podcast, whose podcast? I don't remember, I know, I think it was when Barry Weiss was interviewing this doctor, and he said, 50% of Americans, if you ask them, do you have somebody who you can call when you are in trouble and you can count on them that they will be there, almost 50% of Americans say no. Especially because, even apart from the fact that I have brothers and my person, because I've been here for so long, my answer is yes, so many people. And so I always think somehow I'll be able to work something out. In fact, I don't know if, those of you who were there years ago, and I didn't even know that I was going to say this, but, and this is a nice note on which to end, and you'll see why I say that. But years ago at the APAC conference, Frank Luntz and I did this thing where Frank said, okay, we're each going to ask each other 4 questions. And I asked him all questions about politics, because he's Frank Luntz. He's a Republican pollster, was a Republican pollster. Now he's a sort of non-denominational pollster. And he asked me 4 questions. And I don't remember the others, but I remember the last question was, it was all Sinai members. It was at the Sinai gathering. He said, tell your congregation something you've never told them before. And without even thinking, what came out was, I'm so grateful to you because I know years from now, when I'm not here, if my daughter is ever in trouble, she will have so many people that would be willing to come forward and help her that it gives me a tremendous sense of peace. And so that's, I think, what I would say is the reason, part of the reason anyway. I'm also constitutionally, I'm just that way. I got my father's constitution, which is pretty even-keeled. It's not like I'm never anxious. I'm Jewish. I get anxious. And sometimes more than others. And sometimes I get, like a lot of men, I get anxious without knowing I'm anxious, and other people have to say to me, why are you so anxious? And then I have to say I'm not, and they say, well, why are you tapping on the table for 2 hours straight? You're clearly anxious. But I also think that it's a tremendous, tremendous advantage to have people in the world that you can count on who will be helpful and so on. And so I just kind of assume, it makes me a little angry. I get up in the middle of the night and I think, geez, I don't have an apartment in Cambridge yet, and I really got to find one, and but I know I won't be on the street. Somehow or other, I'll find a place, and so that is a tremendous gift that being here has given me, because honestly, it's like, and I said this to my daughter, I said to her, whatever in the world you want to do, whatever it is, if you want to be an Indian rope dancer, there will be someone at Sinai who will say, oh my God, my best friend is the world's greatest Indian rope dancer, and your daughter has to speak to her. Because that's just, and you may think this is normal, but this is not normal. Because I have friends who are English Catholics. And years ago, knowing that I'd had a brain tumor, they called me and they said, our father just got diagnosed with a brain tumor. Who do we call? So I said, okay, call this person and this person. And a month later, they called me and they said, you Jews, like the moment you put us into the network, everybody took care of us. Like, who does this? This one would refer to that one, and they would call us because of this one. And she said, the English Catholics, we don't have anything like that. And so that's a very wonderful, Jewish quality that, God willing, we will always have. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.